Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily update for October 1st, 2021. I'm going to go straight to the questions because there are three very good ones that deserve an answer. The first one, what can we expect from this deepening economic crisis? More inflation, more loss of supply chains, lack of food on the shelves. What do you anticipate? Well, the debate is a fraudulent one. On the one hand, you have the Federal Reserve debating should they taper, that is, sell off the instruments they've been purchasing to try and keep the prices up, or should they continue quantitative easing to keep the bubble going. You have to deflate the bubble. Unless you do that, you're creating a bigger bubble which will ultimately pop with more damage, especially more damage to what's left of the physical economy because you're draining resources that should be going into physical production in order to sustain the bubble. Now, along with that, you have this so-called budget crisis, the debt ceiling crisis. And what are you dealing with here? This is the problem of unsustainable debt. This is the problem of not having enough income on the state level, on the city level, the federal level, and in the personal level. And by not having enough income, hyperinflated dollars don't help. You may get a raise, but your costs are going up. You've got to bring a certain balance, which only comes from investing in physical production, which increases the overall value of the production of the economy, so that your dollar is backed by something and that you have a livable wage for people. Right now, there are reports that something like 40% of the population can't come up with $400 if they need it for an emergency. People are relying on credit cards. They're relying on the companies like Uber and Lyft and the so-called black economy, the drugs trading and all sorts of crazy things. There's only one solution. This is what Alexander Hamilton realized when we founded our nation, that you have to produce. There's no solution on the monetary side of things. It's physical goods production and the ability to circulate them, which is the basis of an economy. And that requires education, it requires science, research and development, and so on. This is why LaRouche's 4 laws are the solution. Tinkering with the monetary system doesn't work. We see that in Europe. We see this with one plan after another from the European Central Bank and from the Federal Reserve. Worse, they're moving toward the Great Reset, in which they're saying that since you cannot trust governments to act efficiently and properly to cut spending, you have to put it in the hands of technocrats to make the budget policy. Technocrats working for whom? For the central banks, for the private bankers. That's what the Great Reset is. So we don't need a Great Reset. We need a bankruptcy reorganization and LaRouche's 4 laws. And you can go to the LaRoucheOrganization.com and type in LaRouche's 4 laws, or go to LaRouchePub.com and type in LaRouche's 4 laws, and you'll get the explanation and the answer of what to do to stop a catastrophic collapse of the whole financial system, because we're well on the way towards that. Now, the second question is, why did Yahoo run an attack on Pompeo? Now, this is a reference to an article that came out on September 26th, which says that Pompeo and top CIA officials were planning to either kidnap and rendition Julian Assange or assassinate him. Now, the reason for this, according to the authors, is that Pompeo had an obsession with WikiLeaks and Assange because of the role Assange played in releasing something called Vault 7, the hacking tools of the CIA, which are, in itself, that would be quite important. But what is so important about Vault 7? Well, according to Bill Binney, Vault 7 and the Marble framework were what was used to create the phony Guccifer 2 emails that supposedly were the heart of Russiagate, that proved that the Russians ran the operation to elect Donald Trump. Now, here's where you find the more interesting question with Pompeo. First of all, he's a dangerous fraud. He's a liar. He said, well, we wouldn't even consider assassinating someone because of the law. Well, what about Soleimani? What about the Iranian Revolutionary Guard leader who not only was assassinated by a U.S. drone, but Pompeo praised the act? So now he's trying to say we don't do it because of legal reasons? Now, secondly, the question of who's protected by going after Assange. It's war criminals. Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, whether you like him personally or not, he exposed the corruption of the cabal of the military-industrial complex, lying to get us into wars and keep us in wars. Pompeo apparently wants to keep us in wars. And so by attacking Assange, you're establishing the right of the CIA, of the covert action arm of the US government, to suppress freedom of speech. That's what Pompeo is defending when he goes after Julian Assange. Now, one final point. Pompeo is trying to say that the article should be dismissed because it was written by Michael Isikoff, who was one of the most consistent and persistent purveyors of the fraud of Russiagate. And that's true. Isikoff did that. But here's an interesting point about Pompeo. Bill Binney was sent by President Trump to meet with Pompeo to expose the fraud that it was Russian hacking that was behind the release of the Clinton emails. Remember, that's what Russiagate started as, that the Clinton campaign was hacked by the Russians and those emails were given to WikiLeaks by the Russians. And of course, at the same time, you had the Christopher Steele dossier, which said that Trump was being blackmailed by Putin because of sexual indiscretions taped by the Russians in a Moscow hotel, all of which is proven to be a fraud. There was no Russian hacking. As the head of CrowdStrike, Sean Henry, admitted to the Congress, they had no evidence of exfiltration of files from the DNC computers, which means it had to be, as Binney has insisted, an inside job on a thumb drive or something. Now, Binney presented all the evidence to Mike Pompeo. I believe it was in October or November 2017. And Pompeo asked him if he would present this to intelligence community officials, and Binney agreed. But Binney also said to Pompeo, they're lying to you about the hacking. Well, needless to say, Pompeo never followed up, and instead his spokesman said that he stands by the intelligence community assessment of January 2017, which said it was Russian hacking. So, number one, Pompeo lies about his support of President Trump. He could have stopped Russiagate in 2017. Suppose the CIA had done an investigation and come out and said, look, this is an internal U.S. intelligence community operation coordinated with GCHQ of Britain and the MI6 of Britain, which is true. Suppose Pompeo, as CIA director, would have said that. We would have been spared 4 years of attacks on Trump, attacks on Putin, and the undermining of an effort to break out of the geopolitical framework which was leading us toward war. Instead, Pompeo's refusal to do that, and instead his insistence on going after Assange, which besides threatening WikiLeaks and Assange, is a threat to any reporter who wants to do honest investigation. Because what Assange exposed at WikiLeaks was the corruption and the lying of the military-industrial complex. And that's what Mike Pompeo is defending. That's why this is so important, that this story come out and the full story come out as we're going to present it in our publications. Now, finally, the question was, what makes you think the Taliban can be trusted? Because we're talking about humanitarian aid for Afghanistan, we're talking about economic development, working with China, Russia, and others. So there's also a question, why would you trust China for this? Well, what's the alternative? Right now, there's a humanitarian crisis that's threatening the lives of millions of children and women and young men in Afghanistan. Now, how can people say we're so concerned about women's rights in Afghanistan when our policy is to starve the people of Afghanistan by withholding their funds, by having the IMF withholding the special drawing rights, which are needed for them to purchase food, medical supplies, fuel, and other necessities? If you do not provide humanitarian aid, there will be mass starvation in Afghanistan this winter. This will play into the chaos. It will probably mean that people will stick with opium production to make money. It will probably mean the government would not have the capability to resist having terrorists use Afghanistan as a base. It would also mean that we would probably have to send U.S. troops, or that this is what the military is saying, we'd have to send U.S. troops to protect us from a new round of terrorism. Now, on the other side, you don't know what the Taliban is going to do, but we do know what will happen if there's not aid. Now, suppose we work with the neighbors, the people of Pakistan, the government of China, Russia, Uzbekistan, India, to develop a transportation corridor through Afghanistan as part of the Belt and Road Initiative, along with funding power plants, water management, and so on. Well, we didn't do that. We had the government there in our pocket for 20 years, and we didn't do it. We spent several trillions of dollars fighting a war and losing a war without building a nation, without committing ourselves to aiding a country in its development. A fraction of the $2 to $3 trillion, or some people say as many as $7 trillion, in all the endless wars that we've been involved in since George Bush took us to war on the basis of a lie. A fraction of that money spent on power plants, electrical production, roads, railroads, water management would have made a huge difference in these countries. Now, can you guarantee that this would mean the Taliban would not support jihadism in other countries? Well, the Taliban does not have a record of itself engaging in such terrorism. And to the extent it allowed al-Qaeda to exist in Afghanistan, remember who helped build up al-Qaeda. It was built up by the Bush family, by the U.S. military-industrial complex, by NATO, by our alliance with the Saudis, who funded in the 1980s what became later Taliban as a domestic Afghan operation, and al-Qaeda, which was a Saudi-based, Egyptian-based operation inside Afghanistan. So if you want to eliminate terrorism, the war on terror doesn't do it. In fact, the war on terror is an excuse to clamp down on rights and security of people in the United States and Europe through the surveillance state. So the Schiller Institute has put forward a program for developing Afghanistan and providing a way to not just provide short-term humanitarian aid, but to equip the people of Afghanistan to build a new modern nation. Is it worth the gamble? Obviously. Think about it. So thanks for joining me. Have a good weekend, and I'll see you again next week.